Standing at less than 4'11", she was far from the tallest person in our fifth grade class, even if she was the teacher. She was quick to point out, however, that dynamite and diamonds both come in small packages, and it was up to us to determine which she most closely resembled. Gregarious and bubbly, she was not just a teacher, she was an educator in the truest sense of the word. Instead of having us simply collect leaves to try to identify different types of trees or look in some musty old textbook, she took us on field trips for extended weekends of camping with her, where we not only identified leaves, but we also identified all sorts of small animals and vegetation that we might not have seen otherwise. We spent weeks preparing for those trips. She taught us how and what to pack, and how to set up and leave a campsite, and how to make an awesome trail mix. It was one of the best experiences of my life. You see, I was 9 years old, and had just moved to Indianapolis from Dallas, Texas. I talked funny, I dressed funny, and I was the youngest kid by far in the fifth grade. Furthermore, we had pretty much inherited the house that we lived in from my great-grandfather. The house was in a pretty well-to-do area of town, but we were anything but well-to-do, and all of the other kids knew it. I was the butt of everybody's jokes, and children can be exceptionally cruel. I was picked on and bullied to the point of wanting to die. My grandfather was also abusing me at the time, when my mother and my grandmother looked the other way. My parents were on the verge of splitting up. My dad had been the only adult who listened to me, who would allow me to talk and not judge me, who allowed me to have an opinion about anything at all. Nevertheless, with the increasing problems between him and my mother, he was away on business more often than not. I had no voice, I had no friends, I had no self-respect, but what I did have was Mrs. Poteet. One day, I grew so upset and frustrated after a particularly brutal round of bullying, I tried to strangle myself with a jump rope while helping to put away gym equipment. Mrs. Poteet found me, red-faced with my effort, and called my parents. She sat and actually cried with me as I told her my sad tale. I told her everything except for the part about the abuse, because I was terrified of the fallout if other people found out and intervened. I think she knew that something more was going on, though, because later she made sure that I had her home phone number, which is something most teachers would not have ever done. In our math class, we worked at our own pace. We had to complete certain assignments in order to move up to the next level. There was one particular problem that was causing me to fall short of being able to move up. Every time I did it, I came up with the same answer, and I would take it to her, and she would check it with her answer key, mark it wrong, and give it back to me to redo. I worked on that problem for 2 whole days. I had erased that thing so many times that I tore a hole in the original paper and had to start over on a piece of notebook paper instead. On the second day, she finally did the math herself and realized that her answer key was wrong. I will never forget her standing up behind her desk and calling for everyone's attention, and told us that grown-ups were not always right, and that sometimes kids were smarter than their teachers. Then she congratulated me in front of the whole class and thanked me for being patient with her. The boy that sat next to me was one of my worst tormentors, and he sarcastically said, "Oh, well, she deserves a Coke or something." Mrs. Poteet shot him a sharp glare and grabbed some change out of her drawer. And she walked out of the room for a moment. When she returned, she had an ice-cold Coca-Cola that she placed on the corner of my desk and winked at me. That was the best day of my life up to that point, I have to tell you. She was a friend to me when most of the other adults in my life would have had me believe that adults could not be friends with kids. She intervened when necessary, but never to the point of causing more trouble for me. She was my therapist before I even knew what therapy was. It was from her that I learned patience. It was from her example that I learned how to be the kind of mother that I later wanted to be. Years later, I made regular trips to see her at school just to visit, and after she retired, she would meet me at the park and we would sit and talk while we watched my children play. More important than what she did for me was the work she did for others. Although her own children were grown, she remained involved in scouting, and she spent countless hours tutoring kids in the rough area of town. She was a vocal advocate for the United Way, even bringing in her donation jar so us children could contribute as well. And she was a champion for animal rights and the preservation of the earth before that sort of thing was the in thing to do. She did all of this while maintaining her own family and never seemed to tire taking on just one more cause if it seemed like something was important. Everyone has that one teacher who changed his or her high school career for the better. She was definitely that teacher for me. They say that teachers also have that handful of students that just stand out, that they will never forget. And one could say that there was something about me as a kid that spoke to her, and I was one of those kids for her. And I'm sure that that's true. But I know that I'm not the only student whose life she touched for the better. There's a certain local celebrity in Indianapolis with the same last name. I have him friended on Facebook, and I recently asked him if he was any relation to, or I just had to. I'd wondered for years. His reply to me was as follows: I cannot tell you how many people have asked me that same question over the years. Literally hundreds, maybe even thousands. Considering everything that I have heard about her, I truly am sad to say that I have never met her. Lois Poteet is not only the best teacher I've ever known in my own high school career or in the careers of my children, but she is literally one of the best people I have ever known. So the question remains, dynamite or diamonds? She is definitely a little of both.